Good day and welcome back to the Ottawa History Hub podcast. So far this season, we've been building up to the English presence in the region. We've gone from the fall of Quebec, when everything was turning up England, to the American Revolution, when the 13 colonies left the fold. Refugees then flooded north, and the giant province of Quebec was partitioned into Upper and Lower Canada. There are two important things that need to be understood about the settlement of the region that was going to become Ottawa. And they are both realities that contradict some of the prevailing myths about settling the frontier that we get, largely from Hollywood. The first is the Indigenous people. There has never been significant violence to the settler population from the Algonquin. While we've discussed intercommunal violence between the French and the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe during the Beaver Wars, and the English against the Pontiac Alliance, the Algonquin have typically sided with the closest European faction against the furthest. Their numbers had not really recovered since the Beaver War and the various diseases that decimated the nation. And the site of Ottawa was not a point of new settlement for the Algonquin when the English arrived. It was a part of their trading network, but not a settled area like the north shore of the Ottawa Valley. This would change as time went on, particularly as the English went upriver towards the settlements of Alumet's Island, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Suffice to say that in this period, the 21 years between the Constitution of 1791 and the War of 1812, the specter of Indian raids that we see in the movies or on the more chaotic American frontier, but also to a lesser degree in northern New Brunswick at the time, was not a part of the reality of life in the Ottawa Valley for English settlers. The second pop culture image is the frontier homesteader. The idea of a settler braving the wilderness with only what he, his wife, and their 12 children could carry on their backs, before finding a piece of land and saying, "Aye, here I'll make my home for all time," is also fictitious. When Roger Stevens became the first European to settle in what's today the city of Ottawa, he already had an address. That being Lot 30 on Concession 1 in Marlborough Township. Ira Honeywell purchased Lot 26 off the first concession, Ottawa Riverfront, in 1809, being the first European in Ottawa prior to amalgamation, absorbing Stevens' title, pushing him down in the rankings, though he only became Ottawa's first resident in 1950, when Nepean Township joined Ottawa. Urban history is not exactly linear, and urban borders, especially for Ottawa, are not linear. So the question of what constitutes Ottawa has never really been easy to answer. It needs to be recalled that when Patrick McNiff and his team of surveyors came through the area in the 1780s, it was then wilderness, but they nonetheless drew lines for concessions, lots, and townships. The only thing that they didn't bring with them were the people. The invisible lines that McNiff put on maps would be sold in land registry offices in Montreal, Newark, and Kingston, where aspiring settlers would politely register the lands in the presence of the local notary before moving, often with a team of hired laborers to help with the move. The Ottawa Valley settlers were not rugged individuals carving a piece out of the wilderness. They were moneyed people who brought orderly paperwork with them. Ironically, the city of Ottawa was a bit of a vortex of settlement. There were settlements around what would be the city before the city itself started to collect human inhabitants. To the south of the city was Marlborough Township, founded in 1791 with the province of Upper Canada. 7 years later, in 1798, Nepean Township was formed just upriver from the Chaudière Falls as a district within Carleton County. But by that time, it went by the name District D. Downriver from the future city, Ottawa District formally took form in 1816, based around the French settlement of L'Orignal, instead of the newer English township of Hawkesbury. In 1791, Marlborough Township was established as an administrative unit. It ran along the northwest side of the Rideau River as it snaked its way towards Ottawa. Its northern border was Goulburn and North Gower, and Lanark County to the west. The township was named after General John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, an English officer and statesman from the late 1600s. He was famous for never losing a battle, for his loyalty to the Stuart cause, and his close relationship with William of Orange after the Glorious Revolution. He is a shared ancestor of Sir Winston Churchill and Diana Spencer, the late Princess of Wales. The bustling township had a total population of 2 people. The first was a United Empire Loyalist named Roger Stevens, whom we've met before. Roger Stevens was from Stevensbrook in Pitford County, Vermont. The better half of the population, at least figuratively speaking, was his second wife, Polly. They lived on Concession 1, Lot 30. Despite no humans anywhere nearby, their land had chartered borders. Not much is known about Colonel Stevens, save that he served in military intelligence during the Revolutionary War, and he settled near land owned, but not yet inhabited, by his former commanding officer, Thomas Smythe, whose name would grace Smythe Road in Ottawa and the Rideau Valley town of Smiths Falls. Just a reminder that spelling and pronunciation are not exactly etched in stone. Roger Stevens would build a home and a mill along the river and live there alone with his family for 4 years, until the first neighbors came. Stephen Burritt arrived with his wife Martha Stevens Burritt and his brothers Edmund and Daniel. Ashel Hurd and William Soules also joined the Burritts, rounding off the population boom of 1793. One can imagine Roger and his wife complaining about how crowded the neighborhood was getting. I will again apologize for the repetitious names of Roger Stevens from Stevensville, Stephen Burritt, Martha Stevens Burritt, who settled down in Burritt's Rapids. General advice to a storyteller when they're working on fiction is that it's best not to have 2 characters whose names start with the same letter. It will confuse your audience. In many ways, history is a bad novelist. The lots in Marlborough Township filled up relatively quickly. Roger Stevens, U.E., was the first in 1789, the year the French Revolution started swinging. 2 years later, 6 new families bought land in the county, but didn't grace it with their presence just yet. The Dupensiers, the Seeleys, the Soules, and the McNeils, the Reynolds, and the Blacks. And in 1793, they all started moving in gradually, along with the Burritts. Other families, in this case, the Belises, the Olmsteads, and the Grants, would buy up the remaining lots by 1798, pushing new aspiring settlers to continue up the Rideau if they were hoping to find unclaimed land upon which they could set up their home. Marlborough County was incorporated into Carleton County in 1800, then incorporated as Marlborough Township in 1850. In 1974, it would be renamed Rideau Township, and it would be incorporated into the city of Ottawa in 2001. So as of 2001, Roger Stevens was the first European settler in what would be the city of Ottawa. If the city keeps on expanding, he may lose that title to someone further up the Rideau Valley or down the Ottawa Valley. In a generation, William Merrick of Merrickville by way of Springfield, Massachusetts, might take the title if the city keeps expanding as it does. While there were some settlements along the Ottawa River coming up in seigneuries leading up to Hawkesbury, these were in the orbit of Montreal. Land registries were logged in the offices there. The land tenure was the model of the French Civil Code, and when the land was divided up between Upper and Lower Canada, the peninsular stretch of land between the Ottawa and St. Lawrence rivers, stretching 40 kilometers from the Lake of Two Mountains into the continent, was to end up being a part of Lower Canada, then Canada East, and then La Belle Province de Quebec. Further up the Ottawa River, Township D, the future Nepean, was proclaimed in 1792. It would be absorbed into Carleton County in 1800 and then proclaimed a township in 1850. Nepean, in 1792, was not the Nepean of today, largely in that it was centered around the Ottawa River, but did not stretch quite so far inland. It stretched from the south shore of the Ottawa River, just above Chaudière Falls, back to modern Bayshore, stretching inland a few acres. It was much larger than Carleton County, of which Nepean was a constituent, and it included the south shore all the way up to Fitzroy. Ironically, the city of Ottawa would expand to include all of historic Nepean up to the outskirts of Arnprior in 2001. The territory was named after Sir Evan Nepean. Sir Evan was the first of the Nepean baronets. Nepean's father was a Cornishman, originally from the area of Nanpean, from whence he took his name. In Old Cornish, a Celtic language from Cornwall — Cornwall is southwest of England, not Cornwall in eastern Ontario — it means head of the valley. Sir Evan served on the HMS Boyne in Boston and Plymouth during the American War. He was hardly the prototype for Nelson, mind you. He was a secretary for an admiral and then a purser until 1782, at which point the 29-year-old was appointed as the permanent Under-Secretary of State for the Home Department. This put him in charge of naval and political intelligence, and running a vast network of spies across Europe and the colonies. Britain didn't have a formal intelligence service until 1909, but relied on clever and connected men like Nepean. Nepean would be promoted to Under-Secretary of War, Secretary of the Board of the Admiralty, Secretary of Ireland, Commissioner of the Admiralty, and even Governor of Bombay in India, where he diffused 2 mutinies. He was even a member of Parliament for Queensborough for 6 years. Sir Evan was a very important political figure in Britain at the time, but had very little connection to Canada, other than Nepean Township, later Nepean City, Nepean Point, later Kawiki Point, and Nepean Bay, just above the Chaudière Falls. There is a Nepean Road and a Nepean Sea Road in Mumbai, Nepean River, Point Nepean, Nepean Bay, and the Nepean Highway in Australia, and the uninhabited spit of rock in the Norfolk archipelago called Nepean Island, a mere 2-hour flight off of Australia's Gold Coast, west of Brisbane. Upon the inception of the district of Nepean in 1792, the land was granted to George Hamilton, not the actor who replaced Robert Duvall in the unfairly maligned Godfather Part 3, but an Irish veteran of the American War. He claimed to represent 143 settlers and their families who were ready to populate the new country. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this did not manifest. The grants were given to Hamilton and his friends, who held deeds to the land and never came over. When they died and their children got the deeds, they never came over. 2/7 of the land was given to the Protestant clergy. They also never arrived. In the vivid imaginations of land ownership, the absent landowning clergy ministered to the absent landowning farmers, while the land itself maintained its traditional tenureship, no king but the forest. Absentee landlordism was a central issue in the development of Upper Canada in general, but the Ottawa area in particular. Oh, there was paperwork, showing successful growth in the ledger books of Newark, York, and Kingston. But in terms of people, not so much. Absentee landlords continue to plague the city to this very day. People did, however, eventually come. In 1809, Rice Honeywell of Prescott, Ontario, and the richest man in Augusta Township, bought Lot 26 of Concession 1, which runs from Carling and Woodruff, including the Carlingwood Mall, up to the river, from one of the sons of the Loyalist landholders named William Knapp. £5 for 4 acres. That would be a little less than 700 of today's Canadian dollars. Rice Honeywell's son Ira actually moved to Nepean in 1809, and by spring of 1810, he and his staff had cleared the 4 acres and built him a nice log cabin by the river. His wife Polly, née Andrews, joined him in 1811. Downriver, still on the south bank of the Ottawa River, another pioneer had done the same, by the name of Jehiel Collins, from Vermont. Collins built himself a dock in 1809 and a cabin by the spring of 1810. Both these men have claims to be the first European settler in Ottawa. But who arrived first and who finished first is not entirely clear, as not everyone kept meticulous records back then. Collins arrived in what would become Ottawa, but Honeywell lived in what would become the city of Nepean and wouldn't be annexed into the growing municipality until 2001. Either way, Roger Stevens had moved into the area in 1793, 17 years before either Honeywell or Collins, although Nepean has long since been considered part of the Ottawa area, and Rideau Township has been thought of as the hinterland outside of the city. A fourth contender for the title of first Ottawa settler would be Philemon Wright of Woburn, Massachusetts, who arrived and set up on the north shore of the river, just a few kilometers downriver from the Chaudière Falls, where the Gatineau River hits the Rideau, in 1800. His settlement was the largest and most organized, and will be the topic of next week's episode. Wright settled in what would become Hull, which is, while technically not the city of Ottawa and probably never will be, certainly qualifies as the Ottawa area. The final area of settlement that we're going to look at today is to the east. We've discussed the movement of people from the south, coming out of Kingston and following the Rideau River, arriving to the southern outskirts of the future city. Loyalists like Thomas Smythe took land ownership but stayed home, while others like Roger Stevens moved in and settled. Some, like Rice Honeywell, bought land for their children, but they didn't move in themselves. These northerly travelers came far and were setting up homes in a back country, far away from their markets in the south. Settlers also came from the east, mustering in Montreal by ship, switching over to smaller vessels after crossing the Lachine Rapids and heading up the Ottawa River. The seigneuries on the lower Ottawa Valley represented a different cultural and economic tradition than those coming northwards from Kingston. These Ottawa Valley settlements were the long and deep subdivisions that were common in Lower Canada, and their main market town was Montreal, not Kingston. The original settlement on the south side of the river was the riverside town of Hawkesbury, and the surrounding farming territories leading up to the South Nation River, which flowed northwards into the Ottawa River. These eastern areas didn't see any large-scale Loyalist settlement until after the War of 1812. But Carmarthen, Hawkesbury, and Alfred were all laying down the roots of future communities there. Unlike the northerly traveling settlers, who were Anglophone, Protestant, and military, these westerly traveling settlers were largely Francophone, Catholic, and agriculturalists. They were setting up what would become an important part of Franco-Ontario. After the War of 1812, which is 2 episodes away, these lower Ottawa Valley settlements were all amalgamated into a district imaginatively called the Ottawa District. This would be the first time that our maps would include the name of this Anishinaabe people to describe a political or administrative unit, in this case a district, larger than a county but smaller than a province. The Ottawa District would mark the first time that Ottawa appeared with that spelling on a map, in reference to land. The fact that what was then called Ottawa would be a half-hour drive from the city today, as an aside, the Ottawa District was an important step in the development of the city. A curious feature of the Ottawa District is that its district town was not Hawkesbury, but was in fact L'Orignal, a sparsely inhabited settlement at the time. The main landowner was Nathan Treadwell of Plattsburgh, New York, who bought the land after settling in Montreal after the War of Independence. He then treated it as a tax farm, renting out to French Catholics whose land was being bought out or otherwise transferred to Loyalist refugees in Lower Canada. He didn't spend much time there himself. His 230,000-acre seigneury was confiscated during the War of 1812 and returned after his death to his son in 1823, who continued to rent out the lands rather than settle there himself. The district would continue to exist from 1816 to 1849, when it was rechristened the United Counties of Prescott and Russell. As a reminder to those of you who don't want to look at the map on the website, the city of Prescott on the St. Lawrence is not in or even close to the county of Prescott-Russell. Across the river, another Ottawa would eventually take shape in Lower Canada, this being Ottawa County, which existed with some overlap to the Ottawa District of Upper Canada from 1841 until Confederation in 1867. In summary, the Ottawa region was a product of slow settlement over generations. There were two broad categories of immigrants. The majority were largely Anglophones migrating from the south, and the minority were Francophone newcomers coming from the east. Land claims and ownership preceded the arrival of human settlers. Most of the southern immigrants were refugees coming from the United States. Most of the eastern were second and third sons from Lower Canada, moving to new land. The northward population were largely, though not exclusively, Protestant, while the westward migrants were largely, though not exclusively, Catholic. Both populations were rural migrants. There were no cities to settle in, the nearest being Montreal and Kingston. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this episode of the Ottawa History Hub podcast. If you'd like to see a list of some sources or maps, please look at the website at ottawahistoryhub.com. You can follow me at Ottawa History Hub on Facebook and Blue Sky, or at Ott History Hub on X Twitter. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating wherever you downloaded this from, and a review if you feel so inclined. If you'd like to send me an email, you can reach me at ottawahistoryhub@gmail.com. Next week, we're going to be looking at Philemon Wright, the founder of Wrightstown, the future Hull, the future Gatineau. Until then, advance Ottawa, en avant!